from beginning to the end. There's no place for argument. You are God all by yourself. You are God from beginning to the end. There's no place for argument. You are God all by yourself.
Saturday, hilo nagamba kuti ndikuona 2019 2020 isali yabwino ngakhale pamodzi. Ndikuona mavuto azaoneni ndi makamba ndi mafotokoza mbale usamire kwa Mungu. Usamire kwa Mungu. Usamire kwa Mungu chifukwa dziko lako ilili Mungu uyu mbale omaliza aliyesa avomera kuti ndi mbale omaliza. Uno mbale omaliza aliyesa avomera kuti uno ndi mbale omaliza uno. Tisanafike pa zinjoi zathu za masiku atatu zili kozi kusogolo kwathu. Ndikuona 2020 ndi 2019 wako uno uko. Ndi Mungu yekha basi. Chifukwa chimene Mungu akuchita zikoli. Achuma chawo amene amatumikira pansi pa nyanja andani ife ana amene timati ndi ana Mulungu tikunama kuona vuto kukhala zinthu ziwiri zimene ziliko kale kuti uli kuthupi ndi uli kuzimu ndeso zikhala ziwiri kuthupi ndi kuzimu. Ndikuona zikoli of course ambika wiki yatha ndezi kupita abe akulibweza zikola pansili likubwezedwa choncho likubwerera ndiye pamene likubwezedwa mkatimu kuli magulu akutentha sitimamva mufanana ndiye Mungu weka ngothandiza chifukwa cha nthenda zimene ziyange ndiye akubwerera likubwezedwa ndiye kukhala chilango choopsa kwambiri timba muno muziko lili pambali pa mikangano kukhala mikangano yoopsa ziko lapasi kukhala mikangano yoopsa kwambiri ndi mbale omaliza umene uwu ndi mbale omaliza ineyo sindikuziwa chitachitike koma pali zimene anakamba za chiopsezo chimene Mulungu anakamba chitachitike ndi chani. Maso ako ndi anga tionera pompano tionera ziko lako lapansi koma ndikuona ziko lapansi mpungwe wakulu kwambiri. Ndikuona mikangano yoopsa kwambiri ziko lako ilili. Ndi chimene lero Mulungu atipasa mwayi oti tipembezere koma ndimati ndikuuze 2019 2020 ndikuona losakhala bwino. Maiko mgurubuzana mikangano maiko ndikuona matenda za ichi chikuchitika chimene wachiyambaza nazi taliro sindikuchiza kumene chikatere akungolibweza beziko akungoli lomwe ziko lako lapansi ndi mkhala moto mkati koma moto tiulandira mosiyana wina ndezachi muli pompa pamene makhalapo mulandira kutenthako mosiyana mpaka ena afanapo. Mbado malisa Mungu akuti iyeyo Mungu akuti amuziwa wanthu kuti ndi Mulungu ndi ntchito zake.
Workers at the largest cemetery in Sao Paulo are exhuming more than double the amount of bodies they usually do to make room for fresh burials, as the number of COVID-19 deaths in the country overwhelms capacity. But even if the country has now the world's second highest death toll after the US, people are returning to the streets in mass. The World Health Organization is again sounding the alarm. President Jair Bolsonaro, who has threatened to leave the WHO altogether, is dismissing concerns about a lack of beds, calling on his followers to go into hospitals to demonstrate that this is just a political ploy against him.
Is there a field hospital near you or a public hospital? Find a way to get in and film it. A lot of people are already doing this. More people have to do it to show if the beds are occupied or not.
Bolsonaro's dismissive response to the pandemic has further entrenched an already deeply divided country, with weekly protests in favor and against the president, which at times have turned violent. Adding to the turmoil, Bolsonaro and his sons are under investigation for corruption. The opposition is calling for the president's impeachment.
With the coronavirus pandemic, you had in fact an increase in political instability and a political crisis, meaning more conflict between the powers, the executive branch, the Supreme Court and the National Congress.
As the number of coronavirus cases rise, the political divisions are widening, testing the health and the stability of Latin America's largest democracy. Alessandro Ampietti, Al Jazeera.
Good evening and thank you for joining us. There is breaking news on two fronts as we come on the air tonight. Nearly 60 million Americans are under severe weather watches and warnings, with high winds threatening many of those tents now being used to treat coronavirus patients. It's part of a storm system that tore through the South overnight, killing dozens and destroying homes. We're going to get to that story in just a moment, but we're going to begin with those staggering new developments in the pandemic. Tonight, New York State now says more than 10,000 people have been killed there. That is nearly half of the more than 23,000 Americans who have died from the coronavirus. Nationwide, confirmed cases now top 577,000.
One is COVID positive in these hallways. All you hear is oxygen.
The echo of oxygen machines surrounded emergency room doctor Eric Bludinger as he walked through Mount Sinai Hospital in Queens, where patients line the hallways.
What's the situation like there right now?
It's intense, very intense, but thankfully this week has looked much better than last week.
New York hospitals admitted about 2,000 new patients, and that's actually the lowest number in 2 weeks. Still, frontline healthcare workers across the country continue to face dangers. CBS News has learned at least 1,500 healthcare workers have suffered from COVID-19-like symptoms in Michigan's largest hospital network, Beaumont Health. Mo Menard is a director of nursing. She lost her own 47-year-old cousin, a mother of 4, Lanika Barksdale, to the virus.
I'm a human being, the staff is a human being, and this is something we've never seen in healthcare to this capacity.
As COVID-19 spreads, personal protection equipment across the country continues to stretch thin. States like Virginia are scrambling, buying them at a premium from China. A cluster of nearly 300 sick employees at this South Dakota meat plant has shut down nearly 4% of the nation's pork production. Still, nursing homes continue to be among the hardest hit. The Associated Press reports more than 3,600 deaths are linked to long-term care facilities. But the young are not immune. 27-year-old Jared Lovos died in New Jersey on Friday. His girlfriend, Jocelyn Jimenez, says he fought the virus for 16 days, 10 of those on a ventilator.
They kept saying, he's strong, he's young. This virus is very deceiving. Someone so healthy, someone so full of life. And then I got a call on Friday saying that his heart stopped. And my heart literally stopped.
Well, as if doctors and nurses aren't dealing with enough right now, there has been a 60-mile-per-hour wind gust advisory throughout the city of New York today, and that has been a major concern for the Tent Field Hospital set up in Central Park, treating coronavirus patients there. A spokesperson for the field hospital tells us those tents can withstand up to 65-mile-per-hour winds, so certainly kind of close there. But a worst-case scenario, they do have an evacuation plan. Nora?
Well, that is good to hear, Mola. Thank you.
The fourth slide shows the daily figures for those who have sadly lost their lives after testing positive for coronavirus. Across all settings, the total number of deaths now stands at 40,883. That's an increase of 286 fatalities since yesterday. When measured by a 7-day rolling average, the daily number of deaths currently stands at 216, down from a peak of 943 on the 14th of April. And the fifth slide, please. The fifth slide shows the deaths where coronavirus was confirmed or suspected reported by the Office for National Statistics. These figures take slightly longer to compile than the daily figures as they're drawn from death certificates. They include not just deaths confirmed with a positive test for COVID-19, but also those confirmed by a doctor without a test and those where COVID-19 was suspected but not confirmed. The first chart shows that up to the 29th of May, the ONS reported a total of 50,107 deaths in the UK where COVID-19 was mentioned on the death certificate. This compares to the figure of 38,593 deaths confirmed with a positive test previously reported by the Department of Health and Social Care over the same period. The second chart shows deaths by place of occurrence. Since the start of the outbreak, 62% of registered COVID-19 deaths have occurred in hospitals and 31% have occurred in care homes.
Heartbreak in the upper ranks of the Iranian military at the official announcement of the death of Major General Qasem Soleimani, the commander of Iran's Quds Force, the Revolutionary Guard unit responsible for foreign operations. Soleimani was killed in a U.S. drone strike in Baghdad. And anger at Friday prayers in the Iranian capital for the assassination of a man who led the charge against ISIL in Iraq and Syria, and whose death seems likely to lead to more conflict.
God willing, it is now time to clear and cleanse the region of these devils. It is now time to show more resistance to the Americans and show our resistance with action, to tell those Yankees to get out of here, get lost.
In the early hours of Friday morning, shortly after arriving at Baghdad International Airport, U.S. missiles killed Soleimani and his close ally, Abu Mahdi al-Muhandis, the deputy head of the Iranian-backed Iraqi militia, Hashd al-Shabi. Other members of the group were also killed in the attack. A drone strike hit their convoy as they left the airport. For Iran's Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, Soleimani was a trusted confidant, a member of his inner circle. His killing in a targeted attack, the most extreme escalation in tensions between Tehran and Washington in recent years. Khamenei warned there will be revenge.
The cruelest people on earth assassinated the honorable commander who courageously fought for years against the evils and bandits of the world. Soleimani's martyrdom will make Iran more decisive to resist America's expansionism and to defend our Islamic values. With no doubt, Iran and other freedom-seeking countries in the region will take his revenge.
In Tehran, senior leaders met in an emergency meeting of Iran's National Security Council. Many Iranians see the U.S. attack as an act of war.
Across the region, there will be implications. Anywhere where there's an American military presence, Americans should leave those countries immediately. But if I was in the Emirates, I would leave now. If I was an American in Iraq, I would leave now. If I was an American any part in Southwest Asia, I would leave immediately.
The United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights described the killings as a likely violation of international law.
The idea that Iran is not going to respond is wishful thinking that will make the debacle of invading Iraq look like a walk in the park. I do not think that President Trump really understands what he's gotten the United States into going up against Iran. I would argue that going to war with Iran will be the most significant adversary that the United States has encountered since World War II.
While there is talk of revenge, many Iranians don't want to see a war.
Mr. Trump unfortunately acted decisively, saying that we won't go for war, but pushed the issue to war. The leaders must exercise restraint so that the tension in the region wouldn't increase further, because this can have very serious consequences for the countries in the region.
It will definitely increase violence, but I fundamentally disagree with violence and conflict. I believe people moving toward peace and negotiation to reach their goals is much better.
Iranians looked on Soleimani as someone who could protect them. Cut down at the height of his popularity by a U.S. strike, his death marks the lowest point in Iran-U.S. relations in decades. Zain Basravi, Al Jazeera.
Donald Trump has issued a stark warning to Iran, threatening to hit dozens of targets inside the Islamic Republic if it retaliates for the targeted killing of top commander Qasem Soleimani. The U.S. president fired off a series of tweets, part of which said Iran is talking very boldly about targeting certain USA assets as revenge for our ridding the world of their terrorist leader. Let this serve as a warning that if Iran strikes any Americans or American assets, we've targeted 52 Iranian sites, and those targets and Iran itself will be hit very fast and very hard. The USA wants no more threats. Let's live across to Gabe Elizondo now in Washington, D.C. Hi there, Gabe. So President Trump releasing this series of tweets warning Iran about any sort of response. What else has he been saying?
Yeah, this appears to be a president that is consumed at every hour about what Iran might be doing next. And how do we know that? From his Twitter feed. It was just a little after midnight here in Washington time that Trump set out even more threats towards Iran. This just came out in the last hour or two. It said, and I'm going to read part of it, says, the United States just spent $2 trillion on military equipment. We are the biggest and by far the best in the world. If Iran attacks an American base or any American, we will be sending some of that brand new, beautiful equipment their way and without hesitation. Again, that a tweet from the president a little after midnight, and he's really drawing, quite frankly, a dangerous red line there, basically escalating the situation even more so, basically in that tweet, guaranteeing that he will retaliate against Iran should Iran strike any U.S. interests here. This is a little bit surprising because we've been hearing all day on Saturday from administration officials who are saying they were trying to de-escalate the situation, including Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, who said that was the main priority, was to de-escalate. Meanwhile, you have these series of tweets by the president doing exactly the opposite. And in some of his earlier tweets on Saturday, where he mentioned over 50 targets that the U.S. had on their list, he said some of them were important cultural sites to Iran. Iran has more than 20 UNESCO World Heritage sites in the country of Iran, and targeting those militarily would be a war crime. Nevertheless, that is what the president tweeted, at least.
And Gabe, there's been some fascinating content in the New York Times article reporting that the Pentagon officials were, quote, stunned when Trump chose the most extreme option of killing Soleimani when there were other choices given to the president.
Yeah, some administration officials anonymously are talking to the New York Times, and they're reporting that the Pentagon gave Trump what's called a menu of options in response to the attack on the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad. Trump asked for a menu of options, military options that could be undertaken. And on those options, the Pentagon said that they could strike Iran boats or ships. They could strike Iran missile launching places. They could strike some militia, and also said that they could strike directly at Soleimani. Now, when Trump said that is the option he wanted to go with, that apparently shocked the Pentagon. They were not expecting that. They scrambled to get plans in place, and it was Thursday night, according to this report, that Trump ultimately told the Pentagon to assassinate Soleimani And on Friday, that's exactly what happened. Administration officials are saying that it was, in many ways, an impulsive decision by Trump, or that's how it's being characterized by some, at least, within the administration that have spoken to the Times.
Gabe Elizondo there with the very latest from the US and from Washington, D.C. Gabe, thank you.
Iran and its actions overnight launching a ballistic missile attack on air bases housing US forces in Iraq. The Pentagon says at least 2 sites were hit in Erbil and Al-Assad, west of Baghdad. It says the missiles were launched from Iran itself. Iranian state television says the attack was launched in revenge for the US assassination of the Iranian general Qasem Soleimani. The White House says President Trump has been briefed and is monitoring events. Olivia Krellin has the latest.
The roar of rockets as Iran hits back at the United States. 2 bases in Iraq, both housing American forces, struck by Iranian missiles. Shouts of be careful, get inside," in this footage, reportedly taken as the missiles struck. The Pentagon says 2 bases, one in Erbil in northern Iraq and the other to the west of the capital Baghdad, were struck by numerous rockets. Iran says the attack was launched in revenge for the US assassination of the Iranian general Qasem Soleimani. Reacting to the strikes, Donald Trump took to Twitter. "All is well. Missiles launched from Iran at 2 military bases located in Iraq. Assessment of casualties and damages taking place now. So far, so good. We have the most powerful and well-equipped military anywhere in the world, by far. I will be making a statement tomorrow morning." For his part, the Iranian Foreign Minister Javad Zarif wrote, "Iran took and concluded proportionate measures in self-defense under Article 51 of UN Charter, targeting base from which cowardly armed attack against our citizens and senior officials were launched. We do not seek escalation or war, but we will defend ourselves against any aggression." Tehran's response comes just hours after the burial of Qasem Soleimani. Both sides are now watching the other to see what they'll do next and how they'll respond. Olivia Krellin, BBC News.
Now, Iran has admitted its military shot down a Ukrainian passenger jet by accident, killing all 176 people on board. The plane crashed shortly after takeoff from Tehran on Wednesday, after Iran fired missiles targeting US forces based in Iraq. Western countries had been piling pressure on Iran, which had spent days denying that it was responsible for the crash. Well, Iran's Foreign Minister Javad Zarif tweeted this: "A sad day. Preliminary conclusions of internal investigation by armed forces. Human error at time of crisis caused by US adventurism led to disaster. Our profound regrets, apologies and condolences to our people, to the families of all victims and to other affected nations." Well, we'll go live to Rob Reynolds in Washington, D.C. for us in a moment, but let's begin with Asad Beg in Tehran. Asad, this admission, as we're saying, comes after days of denial. So why are we hearing this now?
Well, we've had denials for days now. The Iranian government said that it was false. They said that the United States was spreading lies. The government spokesman here said that the United States and its friends were rubbing salt in the wounds of the families of the victims. But there had been governments around the world, Canada, United States, that said that they had intelligence that the airline was shut down by a missile. We also had the New York Times release a video that showed a projectile, which we now know to be a missile, go up into the air and strike the aircraft. The aircraft then caught fire and crashed to the ground. We had several videos. But we had denials upon denials. The head of the aviation authority here said that it was scientifically impossible and illogical that it was shut down by a missile. They said everything was false rumors. The Foreign Ministry spokesperson accused Western media of suspicious propaganda. Now, there's going to be many questions that the government here has to answer. The General Staff of the military has said that the IRGC, that's the Revolutionary Guard, will have to go on state TV to explain to the Iranian people what happened. We've had President of Iran, Hassan Rouhani, say that this is an unforgivable mistake and they will continue to investigate. So there's a lot of explaining to do by the authorities here, but also why did they deny it for so long, even after the head of the aviation authority said that there was coordination between the civil and military sectors? Why did they accuse Western governments of lying? Why did they say that the Western media was engaging in propaganda? But more importantly, why did they not close down the airspace over Iran, over Tehran? Why did they not ground flights hours after Iran had struck US targets in Iraq and they were expecting that the United States may retaliate?
Asad Beg there for us live from Tehran. Thank you, Asad. Well, even before that announcement from Iran, Canada's government had been pressing for its crash investigators to be allowed in.
We repeat our call for a full and thorough investigation. We have a team of officials from Global Affairs Canada and the Transportation Safety Board in place in Ankara, in Turkey. To date, the Iranians have issued 2 visas, and we expect the other visas will be granted soon so we can begin providing consular services, help with the identification of the victims, and obviously participate in the investigation.
Well, let's go to Rob Reynolds, who's in Washington, D.C. Rob, as we've just been hearing there, the Canadians have been very vocal, especially given the number of their citizens on board that plane. Does this admission mean that they're more likely to be given access that they've been pushing for?
That's possible. That is, of course, up to the authorities in Iran. And I mean, one could imagine that the authorities in Iran will be somewhat abashed now by this admission that after days of denials that their forces were responsible.
Well, Iranian President Hassan Rouhani has just tweeted saying the armed forces' internal investigation has concluded that, regrettably, missiles fired due to human error caused the horrific crash of the Ukrainian plane and deaths of 176 innocent people. Investigations continue to identify and prosecute this great tragedy and unforgivable mistake.
Overnight, Minneapolis on fire. Protesters leaving an auto parts store in flames. Others seen looting a local Target.
Tonight was a different night of protesting.
All of it after demonstrators approached one of the city's police precincts.
We're about to lose the front of the precinct if we don't move this crowd out of the front.
Officers in riot gear tried to maintain order.
You can see the smoke bombs in the distance, and police have been firing pepper spray to try and disperse this crowd. Hundreds of protesters had gathered here, and now police are trying to push them back to keep the peace.
They'd gathered hours before, furious at the death of 46-year-old George Floyd.
When is it really going to change? When is it really going to stop?
The outrage building nationwide. In Los Angeles overnight, Black Lives Matter protesters blocked a major freeway. This man jumped on a police cruiser as it sped away. President Trump weighed in, saying justice will be served and that he's asking the FBI to expedite its investigation into the case.
A very sad event. Very, very sad event.
Now, after the 4 Minneapolis officers involved were fired, the city's mayor is calling on the county attorney to charge the arresting officer.
Why is the man who killed George Floyd not in jail?
That officer, Derek Chauvin, is seen in this now viral video kneeling on Floyd's neck as he begs for help.
When you saw that video, what went through your head? That could have been me.
The police department initially said Floyd had been physically resisting. This new cell phone video appears to show the moment he steps out of his vehicle. 2 officers restrain him. Security footage from a nearby business shows officers walking him across the street in handcuffs. Records show Chauvin was a 19-year veteran of the department. He's been praised for valor during his career, but was also the subject of a dozen police misconduct complaints that resulted in no disciplinary action. His attorney declined to comment. This man owns a convenience store nearby. He says a store employee called police when Floyd allegedly tried to use a fake $20 bill, but that he didn't deserve this.
My employee called me while the officer had his knee on his neck, and she was crying, telling me, Mike, what should I do? The guy can't breathe, they're killing him.
Again, authorities here this morning are still assessing the damage. No telling how many protests are expected later today. But adding to the anger here is a new report from the fire department that reveals that George Floyd showed no signs of life when paramedics arrived on the scene, certainly adding to the questions here.
Yeah, absolutely. Gabe, you also mentioned at the top of the piece that there was a fatal shooting overnight in the middle of all those protests. What do you know about that?
Certainly, Hoda. Well, it's still very early on in the investigation, but there was one man found with a fatal gunshot wound. He was later pronounced dead. Police are now investigating that. They're looking into whether a pawn shop owner may have fired a shot and perhaps killed the man. But again, still very early on in the investigation. As you can see behind me, this is still a very chaotic scene.
And Gabe, a lot of people are also wondering what's taking so long for any charges to be brought forward, including the mayor who you interviewed. So is there a timeline for when that may happen?
Well, certainly, Hoda, that is adding to the anger here. Many of those protesters are wondering why these officers haven't been charged, but some authorities are asking for calm. A medical examiner's report is expected in less than 3 weeks. As you mentioned, the mayor, though, is taking that rare step on calling for that arresting officer to be charged. It's up to the county attorney, and right now he's given no timetable on this. What people are asking for as well is perhaps for the body camera video to be released. That is part of this investigation. Still certainly a lot of questions at this point, Hoda.
Yeah, seems like we've seen that incident from so many different angles. All right, Gabe, thank you.